everyone. Hi, hi everyone. I'm Tony Henderson, the section president of the SFA ITE for this year, and thank you very much for joining us on our meeting today. Hope everyone had a good month and a half since we've last met and enjoyed. Oh, I'm hearing some sound back there. Could people please mute yourselves? I'm going to go ahead and hit mute all on everyone. Okay. Hope people were able to join and attend the ITE annual meeting, second year in a row that it was held virtually last month, which gave a lot of great opportunities for people to join in and out and see the sessions that they wanted to see. We're going to do just a quick round of introductions. I know when we meet in person, we typically pass the mic around and ask everyone to introduce themselves. It's a little bit tougher when it's on Zoom, especially as our numbers of participants are growing. But one thing I would like to ask people to do, if you feel comfortable doing so, maybe turn on your camera for a moment and give a wave. And also just I'll ask some questions like, who's here from the East Bay? San Francisco, Peninsula, North Bay, South, and everyone else. Well, thank you very much for doing that and for doing the introductions. Just want to give an update on our side as well. Thank you for joining our meetings over this last year and a half as we've pivoted to online. We had been hoping to get back to maybe some in-person meetings here in the not too distant future. However, Delta variant is giving us a little bit of a increase in COVID cases and such. So don't know what's on the horizon yet, but we are going to still be continuing to be providing these virtual meetings with a hope of intermixing in person in the not too distant future. Would also like to take opportunity to welcome and introduce two of our board members who are on today, Kevin Carson and Charmin Sala. I believe Lauren is out today, so she wasn't able to join. And with that, I think we can move on to our speakers. And actually today's speakers is a highlight of how these virtual meetings have been very helpful for us. They're both joining us today from across the pond in England to speak about connected vehicle data. So we have with us today James Eaton and Alex from Wejo, and I will let them do their introductions and go from there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tony. A very warm welcome to everybody that has joined us today. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to myself and James, or Jim, as I'm more accustomed to saying, give you an introduction to Wejo and connected vehicle data. So I'll begin to share my screen, but as I do, just as a little background into me and what I do here at Wejo. So funnily enough, Jim or James brought me into the business around about 10 months ago. And my role here at Wejo is as a business development manager on the commercial side. To, as Tony alluded to a second ago, we are based out of the United Kingdom. I'm currently operating in our Manchester office for the fourth time, maybe fifth time in the last 10 months. I've only met Jim a handful of times as well, so it goes to give you an idea of how stressful it's been the last year or so working from home. But it's good to get in the office. It is 8 p.m. here, so I'm the last one standing with the lights flickering, but not to worry. And my role at Wejo is focused on government, engineering and universities and identifying use cases where our connected vehicle data can be utilized. As I mentioned, Jim did bring me into the business 10 months ago. So Jim, take it away.
He says as he struggles to find the mute button there. So hi everybody, good afternoon. I'm Jim Eaton. I'm AVP of Solutions Engineering here at Wejo. I am here to support in the ideation of what our data can do. Supporting technical enablement as well, like a solutions engineer should. And I've been with the business now for about 2.5 years. Over that time, I've seen our business grow from the starting point of us being a commercial business that provides connected vehicle data to where we are now as being the leader in the world, leading and largest provider of this data set of its kind in the world. So happy to talk to you guys today. Yes, we're from across the pond, and I'm based a bit remotely from Alex, about an hour south in a place called Stoke-on-Trent. So that gives you an indication of where we are. The bright lights of Manchester are behind us, as you can see here in some of our backdrop, but that's Manchester is global headquarters, but we provide data both in the UK and Europe, and our primary marketplace is in the US.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jim. Yeah, so to get us started, we're going to go through a presentation that I centers on everything we do here at Wejo, but more specifically, how we provide the data to both public and private sector end users. So we were founded in 2014, and I want to begin by sharing Wejo's mission statement, which underpins what we do as a business. So we stand for data for good, and we are focused on revolutionizing the way we live, work, and travel through the use of big data from automotive manufacturers. So some of the focus of this presentation will be on how our data can be used to revolutionize our lives through contribution to congestion management and Vision Zero initiatives. It is our exclusive partnerships with global auto manufacturers that provide the starting point for this work. So our direct relationships with our contracted OEMs give us access to a diverse range of demographics via over 11 million vehicles in the United States. To bring a bit more context to that number, we saw 95 million journeys in California last month, which made up 32 billion data points. If I was to drill down to city level, we actually saw 2.5 million journeys in San Jose, which made up 579 million data points. Now, essentially, this is incredibly big data, and the processing of highly accurate and granular vehicle data such as this is taken care of by Wejo's Adept platform. So our Adept platform standardizes data from multiple OEMs, enabling greater accessibility to the different marketplaces. This means that private and public sector organizations don't need to go to each OEM directly to process their data insights from their connected vehicles. The vehicle data is essentially transmitted to us via each OEM directly from the head unit of the vehicle via a SIM card which is installed at the time of manufacturing. So it is important to call out firstly that consent is provided at the time the vehicle is purchased, and secondly, that data is de-identified. If one of yourselves on the call today had a connected vehicle within our data set, we would never be able to identify that vehicle, as we don't process any identity data for the vehicles. As previously mentioned, we do stand for data for good, and so therefore we are looking at vehicle user trends and behaviors to impact what is happening on the road, rather than identifying specific individual behavior of vehicles. Finally, we do exist as a business to be positioned in the middle of the mobility ecosystem and provide a common data model that serves as a single integration to multi-OEM data, so we can provide greater accessibility to the end users in the marketplaces that we serve. So one of the unique identifiers of Wejo data comes from our accuracy. Wejo's authentic connected vehicle data is accurate down to 3 square meters or 6 decimal places on the latitude and longitude delivery, and is a true feed from the vehicle itself and comes from no aftermarket retrofitted device. If I was to compare against competing technologies, we can see a wider range of accuracy against the road network. For example, if we were to look at mobile-based collection, this has been around for a while now, and whilst it gives volume, as we can see on the slide, it has a very wide range in terms of accuracy against the road network. In addition to this, we have actually seen instances of multiple probes traveling down a road clustered together, which in actual fact ended up being a bus, a taxi, or potentially even a bicycle. This is due to the fact that the cell phone is registering a speed and will assume the user is driving. Furthermore, if anyone like myself has an iPhone, you might have started to see recently more location-based data notifications. So they're starting to be asked whether you want your data to be tracked for location-based data services. So it gives you an idea of consent starting to be taken away for this sort of collection. And then finally, we have roadside sensors. These are typically used on major freeways and highways, but only capture point in time or point in road data. So they do not have a representation on many surrounding tributary roads, and they're again costly to implement. As a final point, we are increasingly seeing more and more companies and organizations use our data to enhance their overall proposition and being able to contextualize and fill black spots where they could not get data before. And in some cases, the data, due to the volume and accuracy, is replacing other data sources such as Bluetooth altogether. Jim will now take us through a few of the other unique selling points of the Wejo data set.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alex. And thanks again for the time today, everybody. So what we're talking about here then, as I would describe it, is 4 USPs, 4 unique selling points of our data and what it could do and why ultimately it's different in the marketplace. So Alex touched upon one there, and I'm going to go through the 4 of these visualizations that you can see just to give you a bit further flavor of what can be done. So first of all, let's talk about the capture rate of our data. We capture from 11.3 million vehicles out in the US road network data every 1 to 3 seconds. So think of that like a breadcrumb trail. As you can see in this image here in the top left-hand corner of the screen, you can see that there are a set of points there, individual dots on the screen. That is a vehicle that is moving through a roadway. So every 3 seconds, it's saying, ping, this is my lat long, this is my lat long, this is my lat long. And therefore, you can very accurately map a movement of a vehicle from one place to another. The other interesting element to this is in terms of our latency. So how fast Wejo can turn this data around to our onward customers. So think about it in this way, that Wejo can take data from 11.3 million vehicles, which every 3 seconds is collecting a data point. If you calculate that 3 seconds over an entire month, you get to a number around 450 billion data points. So you imagine a CSV file or an Excel file had 350 billion rows of data. That's what Wejo is banking month to month. What we can do then is turn that data around in what we describe as a sub 60-second latency. That's our service level agreement, but typically up to 95% of our data is available from vehicle capture to customer in less than 30 seconds. That's really crucial for Vision Zero studies in terms of incidents on the roadway, secondary accident prevention, those kind of thoughts and ideas. We'll touch on more on that as we come into more of the event data in a few moments. Now let's talk about the top right-hand image that we see here. And again, we're talking about the volumes of vehicles tracked, volumes of journeys tracked over the course of a given month, 1.3 billion over a given month. And this is the journeys now. This is each individual vehicle of the 11 million, how many journeys they may take. Now that image there is a location that isn't too far away from you guys. This is ultimately a location in LA over the course of a day. And the green colors that you can see there are essentially individual data points from all the vehicles that are displayed all at the same time over the course of one day, to give you an idea of the volume of data that we're talking about here. And ultimately in that image, you can also see the relevancy to the road. So think about what Alex talked about earlier on in terms of that accuracy. This gives you an indication that our data is typically where you'd want to see it on the roadway. It isn't like some data sources, as you can imagine, out off the roadway through buildings, etc., that needs to be extrapolated and filtered out. So that's another thing to consider. So let's look on that same tone then in that bottom left-hand image. So in the bottom left-hand image, we're talking a bit deeper about our accuracy here. Alex mentioned it as the accuracy is 3 meters, the precision is 6 decimal places. So essentially we can pinpoint individual vehicles. In this example, you can see here in a parking lot. And again, this is in a location in LA. What you can see there is individual points of data. Now those points aren't colored randomly, they're colored based on the fuel type of the vehicle. So Wejo can understand how many EVs, hybrids and ICE vehicles, internal combustion engines, are visible in a location, what their behaviors and travel and transit patterns may be in differentiation to each other. So that's another thing to consider. Now the final one here is a huge fundamental difference for Wejo. The Wejo has the ability to provide data from sensors that are unavailable elsewhere in the market. So think about your own vehicle, think about your own car, think about how you drive it and some of the actions that could be observed from that en masse from a, shall we say, a whole raft of people at one time to give insights on location. So some of them are interesting to this agency potentially. So think about harsh braking, harsh acceleration, the correlation of those events occurring in relation to a incident. And Alex will touch on this a little bit further through his presentation. But also think about that we can identify weather from these vehicles. We can identify door opening. We can identify occupancy of vehicles. So how many people will be using that HOV lane, for example. So a vast amount of things that's fundamentally different from connected vehicle data based on the array of sensors that we have. So I think that's it for my slide for now, Alex. I'm going to pass back to you to take us through the remainder of the deck.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Jim. So yeah, we've spoke a lot about the USPs of the WeJo data, so it's now time to look at what is effectively our product suite. So when we start to look at the data itself, it's vitally important that all of the users can make use of the data effectively, and that is why we have a wide range of products and services that can suit all infrastructures and capabilities. So on the left-hand side, our driving events and vehicle movement data sets are our source data sets. Driving events and driving events select, the subset, are specific events captured by the vehicle between ignition on and ignition off that contribute towards a variety of safety and environmental use cases. This data is available in batch delivery, essentially, to the user's chosen delivery schedule, and we have data ranging back almost 3 years to support historic modeling. Vehicle movements, as Jim touched on a little while ago, is our breadcrumb trail of the movement of the vehicle, captured every 1 to 3 seconds, depending on the particular OEM and this can be provided in near real time. So with an SLA of 60 seconds, however, we do typically deliver this data in around about 35 seconds. So an example of this would be streaming the data directly to a traffic management center to allow them to actively manage and respond to congestion. So as mentioned on the left, that was our source data. So that's the raw data that is collected directly from the vehicles. On the right-hand side, we have our intelligence products, which are curated from the trillions of data points that our source data provides. So this data could be considered our access to big data aggregation. Traffic intelligence, for example, allows us to look at trends within road segments in 15-minute increments, such as average speeds, vehicle counts, and harsh braking events. Whereas journey intelligence allows us to perform origin to destination analysis through specific POIs and waypoints or through a particular city or region. Jim and I will now touch on each of these data products and the use cases they serve individually, but I wanted to give you that very top level of source data versus intelligence products to start off. So to kick things off, we'll go with our driving events product first. Now, as previously mentioned, driving events and driving event select, the subset that comes from another OEM within our data set, refers to specific events captured by the vehicle between ignition on and ignition off. So these events serve use cases typically centered on safety, where specific events can begin to deliver insight into what is happening on the roads, such as a seatbelt being unbuckled during a journey. Some of the examples that we see in terms of use cases on the screen both relate to safety and environmental. Our ability, especially to understand harsh braking events across the US road network, coupled with the understanding of speed taken from the vehicle, contributes towards incident avoidance and allows next day analysis of roads susceptible to dangerous driving behaviors. Similarly, through our driving event select subset of data, we are able to understand the conditions of the road through window wiper speed and status, and then external temperature readings. This, in essence, allows us to understand microclimates across the road network and understand the conditions during congestion and when incidents are occurring or where incident hotspots are, so we can begin to understand what the conditions of the road were during a time of safety. And a lot of the work we have done in the past has focused on work zone safety. We'll look through a couple of visualizations in terms of demoing our data in a couple of slides' time. But for now, Jim is going to take us through the available data that is captured inside driving events and driving event select in terms of the attributes of each data point that we get.
Excellent, thanks, Alex. So yes, I appreciate there's probably a lot of text on this slide, but I would draw your attention to some things that are always common in a data set like WeJo's. Ultimately, the where and the when. So think about some of the attributes you can see here on the Left-hand side around latitude, longitude, again, that is the location element. We have a capture date and time, essentially for each data point that is in the data set. And then what's ultimately fundamentally different is that you will receive data that can understand such things as ignition on and ignition off of a journey. So where the journey starts and where the journeys end. Seatbelt latch and unlatch for safety studies, click it or get a ticket, those kind of campaigns. Acceleration change type, we've touched on this a couple of times, and Alex will have a visualization in a moment to bring it to life. So we'll come back to that one. And then speed above threshold of 80 miles per hour, and then when the vehicle then drops back below that threshold, below 80 miles per hour. So this is some of our, should we say, our longest serving kind of data set of its kind in the the column you see here on the left-hand side. Now on the right-hand side, these are a new set of data. This is a new data set that we've received towards the early part of this year. What we're starting to receive then is fuel level of the vehicle, as you can see, odometer. Interestingly as well, we can see door state change, so hood, trunk, door, front doors, rear doors opening, etc. Occupancy. So some other ones that are interesting to call out here would be autonomous emergency brake, excuse me, ABS, electronic stability state change, all give us an identifier of different behaviors on the roadway that be inferring safety depending on the conditions. So harsh braking is where a driver has physically pushed the pedal down and made an interaction with the vehicle in that way. Autonomous emergency brake identifies a slightly different behavior because that's where the vehicle has intervened to brake essentially. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. I'm going to come back to you, Alex, then to give us a couple of visualizations on bringing driver event to life.
Brilliant, thank you. And I usually precursor this slide by saying a visualization is much better at showing the capability of our data set than my words can. However, Jim explained the data set this time, so he's actually very good at explaining the data set. It's a little bit different than a usual client call, but the following data is essentially our driving events data, and more specifically the harsh braking and harsh acceleration data overlaid onto the city of Austin. So WEJO data allows proactive rather than reactive traffic safety precautions. The annual economic cost of car accidents in the United States is at an estimated $242 billion. And WEJO data can identify or can be used to identify and help contribute towards Vision Zero. I know that San Francisco especially has a mandate to reduce traffic accidents or traffic casualties to 0 by 2024. And this is something we can begin to look at. So we can see a large amount of harsh braking events throughout the city of Austin in specific areas. Do they know about the specific cluster of safety issues in different areas? They might know about some, but WEJO is able to essentially provide a daily drop of all of these events so the city can begin to protect its citizens proactively, highlighting changes on the road that are causing these clusters. So as we can see, specifically a highlight of very numerous red dots in specific areas. And we actually start to look at what happens when we overlay external, and it's important to say external crash data onto these WEJO harsh braking events. We recently did a webinar with Professor Darcy Bullock of Purdue University, who has evidence that for every 147 harsh braking events, there will be a crash. So as we let the video play through, you'll start to see that crash locations are very often surrounded by a number of harsh braking incidents. We can see that correlation that Darcy Bullock identified, and this information can allow an agency to use WEJO data to react in days rather than weeks, months, or years. This allows a swifter tactical response to events occurring on the roads, and as I mentioned, start to contribute towards that zero traffic death aim of San Francisco's by 2024. Moving on to our second flavor of source data, this is our vehicle movements. So we've touched on a few of the USPs of vehicle movements in previous slides, but I'll mention again that this is essentially movement data that is captured every 1 to 3 seconds, depending on the OEM that is providing the data. And we are able to provide incredibly granular visibility of traffic from its origin to its destination. So in terms of use cases, traffic management is an essential one. The granularity of our data allows us to look at traffic signal optimization and improve traffic flow monitoring. One of the most common use cases is looking at intersection turn count analysis, as we're able to plot each turn at an intersection due to that 1 to 3 second capture rate. As mentioned, we are also able to provide highly accurate and detailed analytics surrounding origin to destination that can support travel demand modeling. We have regularly supported in work where we have provided journey analytics through chosen corridors or from specific areas, looking at the speeds, the amount of journeys, the end locations, the start locations to understand the traffic through a specific area or specific destination. And again, our technical expert, Jim, will be able to talk through the specific attributes that we gather through this data set.
Very kind, Alex. Thank you. So yes, very similarly to driver events, we still have that same where and when identifier in terms of the lat long and the captured timestamp. What's interesting in this data set is it's a data capture, as Alex described, every 3 seconds from every vehicle in our fleet, and it's providing a speed in every one of those data points. Essentially now, this isn't a inferred speed, this is speed directly from the head unit of the vehicle, so it isn't a movement of data between one point in time to another point in time. This is the actual clock speed of the vehicle itself, so it has a high accuracy to that respect. So that gives you an indication. The little visualization here shows this, that we capture information from ignition on, which you can see where the little green dot is. Through all the triangles that you can see, that's the direction of travel, and the size of the triangle in that space there is essentially the speed of the vehicle at that time, down to ignition off event where you see that in red. Now, the interesting thing around that used on mass is it could be on understanding in terms of flow of traffic, volumes of traffic, speed of traffic in and around an area. If you do some calculations with the data, you can understand mass slowdowns of vehicles, mass reduction of speed, mass increase of vehicles in an area to understand where an incident may have occurred from an inferred attribute like that. The other thing that I would draw your attention to is this data set allows us to have a few additional identifiers of these vehicles. And this is a key thing for Wejo to tell you about the bias of our data. So we can tell you the make, sorry, I'll correct myself, that's a change to that at the moment. So we have the ability to provide a vehicle type ID, which Wejo has translated from a VIN number, essentially. This then is up to our onward customers would be in the form of a body type of vehicle, fuel type of vehicle, and year of the vehicle, year of manufacture. So this gives further identifier to say that it's an SUV, it's an EV, and it's from 2015 as an example. There isn't too many of those about there, but I just use that as an example, essentially in that. So pass back over to yourself, Alex, to bring this to life in a location that's quite close to home for the team here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking at the Los Angeles freeway here, and just to point out, there's been no manipulation of this data other than to stitch the timestamps together and to then add that speed legend. So alongside the timestamp we mentioned, we get the latitude and longitude accurate to 6 decimal places or 3 meters squared, and then the heading, the ignition status, and the speed. So Jim mentioned earlier, it's not the speed estimated based on the GPS, it is taken directly from the head unit of the vehicle. Overlaid on, and this is essentially overlaid onto a very popular GIS tool, and it's very easy for us to begin to look at, due to the accuracy of the data, the movements inside specific lanes, but then also the congestion based on speeds. You can start to see where different levels of traffic have moved away from the main areas of congestion to get back onto the freeway, etc. Feel free to chip in, Jim, if you've got anything extra to add to this slide, but I think it's a good representation of
I would
our
say a
movement
few
data.
things is very echoing yourself there, Alex. It's giving an indication of speeds, it's giving an indication of volumes of vehicles. Obviously, like any data set of this kind, you would see more data in the higher functional road class, such as the freeway that you can see here. But I'd also draw your attention to the sort of the residential areas where data can be observed. Wejo doesn't, shall we say, remove that data. We do pass that on to our customers, because if you think about where an incident may have occurred, or the how should we say, roadworks that may occur on a roadway, it's important to see what the knock-on effects across the entire road network would be, not just the primary roads at this point. So that is something that Wejo can provide. If there was a collision on this roadway and vehicles were traveling off into the residential area, we can see that data as well. So that gives you an indication of how the data could give you a more holistic view of an area. So yeah, back to you, Alex.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for providing further clarification. Just as we let the video play out. So what we've spoken to so far has obviously been, as mentioned, our source data. And we touched briefly on what is our intelligence product suite. So our intelligence product suite has been curated from the trillions of data points that we receive through our source data to provide more actionable and accessible insight reports that support specific use cases. So this data set is provided in a more industry standard format, and there's a data that can be interrogated in a much more user-friendly way. The first example of one of our intelligence products is our journey intelligence. So this uses aggregated journey data from millions of connected vehicles, translating those billions of data points into easy to consume insights, providing journey volumes and valuable metrics, including the average speed and travel times spanning the whole of the US. These journey analytics are provided by looking at journeys that pass through a specific waypoint, which can be a bridge or an intersection, and POIs, or we can look at journeys that travel through specific cities or regions. Traffic intelligence, on the other hand, allows us to look at vehicle trends inside the OpenStreetMap's road segmentation, identifying vehicle counts, whether moving or stationary, average speeds, and then safety events such as harsh braking and harsh acceleration, inside 15-minute buckets to support a variety of use cases within the public sector. So the key, again, to these intelligence products is that they come in CSV format, and they are essentially, as I mentioned earlier, sort of access to big data, because they come in much more manageable size in terms of file types and size, but then they're also much more actionable on the user's end. So it's very easy to interrogate and interpret this data through a tool as simple as Microsoft Excel using pivot tables, but then also it's very easily readable in terms of BI tools and GIS tools as well. And as always, we have the attribute sheets that Jim is going to take us through, please.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex. And just appreciate the questions coming in, guys. We're going to get to those in a moment too, so please feel free to continue to ask your questions. Just a quick time check. Tony, I think we're good for time. I think we've probably got another 5 minutes or so to run, but let us know if we are pushing for time for the Q&A. So let's continue here then to look at journey intelligence. So journey intelligence, thanks, Tony. Journey intelligence is an aggregate data set, essentially. This is an aggregation of our vehicle movements data set, as Alex was describing there, to provide a origin to destination analysis, essentially for a location. What's interesting in this data set is that we are providing average duration of trip, average distance of trip, average speed of the trip over its origin to destination, but also the vehicle fuel type, vehicle body type, as you can see here. And these, and I can see a question in the chat, and I'll be able to answer this one right now. Weejo receives a squish VIN, an abbreviated vehicle identification number. We don't pass that onward, even though that is still in a de-identified data set. We don't pass that on anyway. We pass on a vehicle identifier, which is our translation of the VIN, essentially. So it's not a VIN that's passed onward. So you can have some comfortability in that. We're just providing it's an EV, it's an SUV, and what model year it would be as an example. We'll touch more on that in the Q&A. So if we go on to the next slide, Alex, and talk about traffic intelligence, a little bit different. So where journey intelligence was an origin to destination product, this is giving the average speed and average vehicle volume that we see by road segment. So think about if you took your entire road network, chopped it up into road segmentation, we're providing how many vehicles to see in that road segmentation at that time. And that is to a 15-minute aggregate, and we can refresh that on a daily basis, essentially. So if you think about that in terms of vehicle counts, we can do a vehicle count that we see for the representation of our vehicles on any segment of roadway and in the entire US road network. Weejo says that it has data on up to 95% of the total US road network over a calendar month. So we have a high confidence in being able to provide some insight on the vast majority of the road network you may have. So a couple of things to touch on this one. Average speed is something that we can provide. Vehicle density, as I talked about. This also has how many harsh braking, harsh acceleration events we see in there. but also we do a calculation on the average stationary time per vehicle in that segment as well to give some further identifier around congestion in that given area. So I think the next couple of slides, Alex, there's a couple of visualizations on the intelligence products, starting with traffic intelligence first.
Yep, so Jim will take us through one portion of our visualizations for our intelligence products, but just quickly, this again is traffic intelligence overlaid onto a popular GIS tool with a speed index provided in the top left again. So as Jim mentioned, we cover 95% of the US road network, and the speeds being showed inside 15-minute increments are on the OpenStreetMaps road segmentation. So very easily able to understand the traffic flow inside Detroit and identify areas of low speeds and likely congestion inside those 15-minute windows. So this data is essentially able to still help with traffic signal optimization and general traffic travel modeling. And you can start to see that even in the sort of off-street neighboring areas, you can see that congestion compared to the freeways and highways that have that green speed. So it's just a really good depiction of the traffic intelligence being ingested into a GIS tool with all of the similar speed attributes applied. And then Jim's going to take us through, as the leader of our recent ESRI partnership, some of the visualizations that we can look at inside that tool.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So this is an example then of our journey intelligence product and what it can be used for. And this is using ArcGIS Online as the tool set. So essentially what we're talking about here then is origin to destination patterns. As you can see by the direction of the arrow. So obviously at the point of the arrow is the direction the vehicle ended at. And obviously the other end of the arrow is where they started from. This is given a bit of a profile of vehicle movements in and out of Manhattan, as you can see here. And what's interesting, again, we've used that vehicle ID from Wejo that's given an indication of what kind of vehicle is interacting in that area. So you can see SUVs, sedans, pickups, hatchbacks, coupes, etc., that can be seen in this data set. The one thing to note, this is over one hour of Manhattan, and it's between the hours of 11 and 12 in the morning time. And we've only filtered it to a view of just the vehicles that interacted with this area with a 5-mile radius. So we can provide it back all the way up to where the vehicles originated their journey. The other thing I would draw your attention to is where you see the circles. That's where the origin and destination is in the same zip code, essentially. But you could model this on, there was somebody about to speak there, so apologies for talking over you. So ultimately, this is giving an indication of movements of vehicles in a GIS tool such as this. I think we have one more visualization, Alex, I think, and then we'll be coming to the Q&A. So this is the traffic intelligence piece that Alex was showing earlier. I think the location Alex was showing might have been Detroit, but this is now back in Manhattan. So essentially what we have here is another illustration of that tool being used. So you can see the average speed in the color part of the chart here. So as you can imagine, darker color down to the darker red is slower speed, lighter color is faster. But also when you look at the vehicle density, the thickness of the line is apparent. Now it wouldn't be, well, it's easy to say, and it makes sense ultimately of this data set that your ring roads, the outer roadways of Manhattan are the fastest and also have the most amount of vehicles. And that's reflective of this chart here. When you look at the individual blocks, we're still providing insight there, where you can see there are vehicles, speeds are slower, and there are less vehicles total. So that gives you a bit of an indication of how that data set can be used on a large scale such as that. So I think we've got one more slide, Alex, and then we'll be coming to the Q&A.
Yeah, and the final slide is just a brief summary on what we've spoken about. There's no need to go into too much detail on this, but it's just important to reiterate that in terms of what Wejo do, so we exist as a business to curate data from multiple motor manufacturers to provide data out to the various marketplaces in one seamless integration from the connected vehicles. Then we are looking at, we're able to supplement existing data methods to contribute towards various use cases and initiatives such as congestion and Vision Zero. And something that we've touched on is the suite of products we have in terms of having an answer for all infrastructure and capabilities. We've talked about a lot of different ways we provide data on this call, and there's also a variety of other ways that we do work with our end users to make sure we can give them data in a format or through a platform that suits them. So I'm more than happy to always have those conversations with a specific client and make sure we tailor a approach specifically based on the best thing for them, or if it's an engineering firm, the best thing for their client as well. And that is it. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here today to listen to our Wejo presentation. And yeah, we're more than happy to take any questions that have been provided in the chat at this point.
Excellent. So let's just look at some of the questions here then. I think one of the ones that sticks out to me over a couple of questions here is around privacy, basically for these vehicles, and essentially how do we gain consent. It's a great topic to bring up, and it's absolutely something that is fundamental at the core of Wejo. I think Alex talked about it at the top of the presentation today around Wejo's core mantra, which is data for good. So there are a few things that we do in terms of ensuring that doesn't we don't infringe on any PII or anything of that nature. So first of all, it starts with where Wejo is based and where our head office is. It's from Manchester, UK, and recently the UK has decided it's perhaps not part of the European Union anymore for some reason, but ultimately we still have the same jurisdictions as them in terms of GDPR. So all our data is fully GDPR compliant at this point. Wejo is very, very aware of CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act, and we have a view on that in terms of our information security teams that are constantly monitoring the situation, ensuring that we still remain compliant, because again, core mantra of Wejo is data for good. So how do we do that? So first thing around consent. Consent is managed by the OEM at point of purchase of the vehicle with the driver of that vehicle. The driver of that vehicle will subscribe to a concierge service or a breakdown cover, and in the contract it will say your data will be used for the purposes that Wejo would use it for. Now there is, as you can imagine, many uses for this data of this kind, but there are only certain fields of use that we agree to use our data for, such as safety concerns, congestion, incident management, those kind of things. So that's some of the core values and core use cases that Wejo uses its data for. So to recap there, the data is given at consent. The consent is given at point of purchase with the vehicle and the OEM. So all the data that flows onto Wejo is already prior consent given for the duration of it being on our platform. Now consider one of the things that Alex mentioned earlier on, and this was around the current stance on privacy and opting in, opting out of location data by trip. Now, Wejo's data is opted into for a longer panel of time, a longer duration of time, so we can give you further insight in the roadways over peak travel times, whereas you would imagine from some sort of LBS collection methods, that could be opted in from trip to trip, etc. So that's something to consider in that view. The next layer I would say is that our data, how could we put it, does not have a persistent identifier in it. We cannot pass this on to our onward customers. That means you cannot track the same vehicle from journey to journey to journey, which I don't believe is this forum's intent, but ultimately this is a preventative measure so that an individual could not be tracked. We're talking about the vast movement and volume of vehicles from A to B, which I'm sure is some of the use cases that you may be interested in. The final thing that I would touch on upon this is that we mentioned the VIN earlier on. So Wejo actually receives a squish VIN, as we'd like to call it, an abbreviated vehicle identification number. It's only a partial VIN. We then use that partial VIN to understand the make, model, and year of a vehicle. We then use that further on to our outward clients in order to understand the vehicle type in terms of the body class, as I mentioned earlier on. Is it a coupe? Is it a sedan, etc.? Then we also understand what fuel type it is. Is it a hybrid? Is it an ICE vehicle? Is it an EV vehicle? And then what year is that vehicle? So is it model year 2015 and upwards? So that gives you an indication of where our data comes from, in essence, in the vehicle models that we see. So through those three measures, a few measures there I mentioned, and the use cases that we use our data for, and that this appears on any contract that you have with Wejo, is that ultimately we are very aware of privacy concerns and very GDPR compliant at this point. So I hope that helps in that segment. So Alex, I don't know what question we want to go to next. I've seen this one here. I can take it, but I'll tee it up. I may have missed this, but what is the delay between event capture and the capture to processing? I don't know if you wanted to start that one off, Alex, and I can follow after if needed.
I've lost that one, Jim, so just go ahead if you want.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, cool. In terms of event, this is an interesting piece. So for the event data set that we have currently, this is based off an ignition off event from the vehicle. So we typically provide this data set as a daily delivery. So we'll give you yesterday's data today, essentially. That's the best sort of latency measure we can give you. There's a slight complication how the data is captured in that way. It's actually then transmitted at an ignition off event. So we always have to wait for a vehicle's journey to end before we can transmit it. But we group it into a daily batch and provide that as a daily update to our customers at this point. So hopefully that helps in that question. So we touched on a couple of the privacy and anonymity ones. Yes, there is a GPS element in that, but as I mentioned earlier on, there is no persistent identifier to track an individual from trip to trip to trip, essentially. And the fields of use that we would enter into a contract with the customer would stipulate that it is not to be used to identify an individual's home address down to that level. So that's something to be clear on there. Will a copy of these slides be made available? I think that's a question that we can both answer that one, Alex. Yeah, we can provide these afterwards, no problem. So the next one I've got there is, are you saying this product can predict the future event accident locations way ahead of time? So this is a very interesting one to pick up on. So we are providing a very good baseline of data to model where an event may occur over time. So this is the key instance here. So I think this question may have come up in part of my playthrough of identifying in near real time where an incident has occurred. But if you think about that, if you modeled that over many months, many weeks, many years to our data set as it's gained to that point, you can start to get an idea where these habitual, continual events may occur and where it's more likely or less likely to occur. So we have some partners that use our data to model event prediction, essentially, from a data set that is very, very ground truthed in actual vehicles in comparison to other LBS data sources that could be out there. So hopefully that helps in some of the context on that one. How is seat occupancy determined? Can the sensors tell the difference, I like this one, between an actual person versus a bag of groceries or other heavy items? Fantastic question. So we have a couple of identifiers that can help with this. I'll start it off that we have, as you can imagine, the driver. We can understand the driver when there's a driver in the vehicle, and front seat passenger at this point. But Wejo will have in the coming future the ability to understand full occupancy of a vehicle. Now, how is that calculated? We can look at it in one of two ways. We can look at it in seatbelt status, whether it's latched or unlatched, but also seat pressure. So I guess there's a combination there where there is seat pressure and seatbelt status would give us a better inferment of a human. But let's be honest, it isn't a 100% fail-safe way of doing it. But consider that in comparison to other data sources. How could they provide you that insight that Wejo is starting to offer? And that's one thing that I would question back on that point. So Alex, I don't know if you want to take this one. How is data collected from the vehicles? Can any company retrieve this data?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So yeah, Jashby, I think you've asked another question at the bottom as well, so I'll answer both in turn. So data collected from the vehicles, it's collected from a SIM card in the head unit of a vehicle, and it can't be retrieved by any company because we form exclusive and unique relationships and contracts with our providers. So we have 3 live automotive manufacturers in the USA at present, and the data is exclusive to us and can't be provided in any other way to the marketplaces that we serve and the fields of use that we operate within. So yes, it is essentially, and to touch on the previous question as well, are the data points cell phone based? It is SIM collection, but as we are talking the head unit of a vehicle as opposed to a small mobile device, it means that the reception and the signal is much stronger in terms of the providing that accuracy of data, that 3 meters compared to mobile based collection. And then you mentioned also, Jashby, that looking at historical data. So funnily enough, earlier today, I was talking to an engineering firm about doing an origin to destination analysis. They essentially want to look at August 2019 versus August 2021 to understand pre-pandemic and then current volumes and looking at the analysis through that. So we can go back to around about late 2018 for our driving events data and early 2019 for our movements data. Jim, you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong there, but it's roughly around about that. So we are able to provide historical analysis and comparison with the data that we currently have to that of 2 to 3 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would sort of carry on that vein around This is directly from vehicles. It is an LTE SIM card that's embedded in the head unit and it's transmitted by a parabolic aerial in the vehicle itself. Now think about the size and scale and the dedicated task that ultimately does. That gives you an indication of why our data can be more accurate than that, say, of a mobile phone that could be in a bag in the boot of your, sorry, the trunk of your car. That's a UKism there. The trunk of your car, for example. And then that's a consideration then in terms of accuracy. But ultimately our data is GPS derived. So we do have some common, should we say, elements the same as GPS from a mobile phone would have. So we are transparent and we are open that we do understand that we would get urban canyoning as an example. However, we come from a position where we are a vehicle, so you get a better indication of a vehicle should be on the roadway, essentially. Another, again, a great thing to model from in that way. So there we go. I think we've come to the top of our questions. We've got a few more minutes here. I guess we can look to Tony if there's anything from yourself, sir, or if there's anything else you want us to cover in this session today.
Well, I just want to thank you first and foremost. I find this very interesting, and I think you touched on a different kind of near miss model, but similar thinking of the Heinrich pyramid and how this could have the potential for really identifying those hot spots and where interventions can be beneficial to prevent near misses from becoming something more. So really appreciate all of this information and you taking the time to present today. I know we've gone through all the questions in the chat. Is there anyone who would like to unmute themselves and ask a question before we start winding down? Not hearing anything. I want to thank you again on the behalf of the San Francisco Bay Area ITE section. Everyone in the Bay Area, have a good afternoon, and you gents across the pond, have a good evening, and hope you're about ready to wind down. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. For everyone local, we'll be sending out some more information soon on our next meetings. And thank you for joining, and have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tony. Take care.
Thank you.